So Linda, I'm going to direct the first question to you. You are the current chair of the Alliance. So talk a little bit about the Alliance, how it came together, and then how you all are partnering not only on this initiative, but on other things.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Deb, and thank you, Sid, for having us all here, and thanks to all of you for being a part of this important discussion. So the Alliance for Board Diversity came together actually prior to 2004, but officially came as an organization officially with our inaugural Missing Pieces report in 2004. And the organizations that initially came together actually were ELC, HACR, and Catalyst, and then LEAP was added in the 2010 census, I think, or 2006 census. And part of the reason why the organizations came together is that in looking at the landscape of boards at the time, it was clear that there wasn't a whole lot of diversity. Women and minorities were a very small percentage of the numbers of board directors and the number of board seats that they occupied. And as is with most sayings, there's some truth behind it. The saying around what gets measured gets done really became, in a sense, that rallying cry for why together we all needed to really put that spotlight on the lack of diversity on corporate boards. And what we also realized at the time is that individually, one group wasn't necessarily going to make that kind of shift. It actually really needed to be the collective action of multiple organizations, which is why the Alliance for Board Diversity came together to really shine that spotlight. And so I will say, as Deb had mentioned, I am cautiously optimistic that we're going to start to see additional change because the numbers are actually really shifting, especially from 2016 to 2018.
Yeah, and Linda, one other question I'll just ask about ABD. So I know there were goals that were set. Yes. In terms of a target. So can you talk a little bit about that and where we are at this point?
Sure. So at a retreat several years ago, coming together and just really talking about what is ABD trying to do, what we realized is that we needed to actually put some kind of stake in the ground and to say, what are we working towards? So what we did is we set a goal of seeing 40% diversity in terms of women and minorities on corporate boards. And at the time, we were looking or estimating that we're probably going to be 2030, maybe past 2030 by the time we see this number achieved. But we felt like we needed to set a number. And in this last report, though, we're glad to see, and this is why I say that we're seeing progress, the estimate now is that we will hit 40% diversity on Fortune 500 boards by 2024. Previously, it was in the last census, 2016, it was 2026. So we are seeing that progress. On the Fortune 100 boards, I think we're going to hit 40% diversity much more sooner because right now we're at around 38, almost 39% women and minorities on corporate boards. So we're hoping that by the time the 2020 census rolls around, we'll be able to say that at least we have 40% diversity on boards. And why is a number like that important? Because when you think about it, 40%, let's say you have 10 board members, 4 out of 10 board members are women or minorities. And when you have that kind of critical mass, it means that diverse board members are going to hopefully feel that they can bring up some of the tough questions, the tough issues, that when they're not the lonely only, they're feeling like, do I bring it up, do I not bring it up? And so that gives at least that kind of baseline critical mass to actually really raise some of those kind of tough questions that I think people with different backgrounds and experiences, different perspectives can bring to those boardrooms.
Yeah, that's great, and maybe just a couple other factoids we'll throw out here. So 46 of the Fortune 100 companies have more than 40% yep. Diversity on their board, so almost half. 145 of the Fortune 500 have 40% or more on diversity on their board. And I'm happy to say in the Fortune 500, there's less than 8 companies that have no diversity on the board. So we're making progress. We're making progress.
We can clap.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Progress is good.
Yeah. So I thought it would be interesting, and Skip, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll just sort of go down the line. But you know, each of these organizations is proactively taking a number of steps to try to advocate for more diversity in the boardroom. And so I'd love each of you to just maybe briefly talk about what are some of the key initiatives, and are there any new things that you're doing that you think are particularly noteworthy?
Sure, thanks, Deb. And Sid, thanks for the invite. Sid and I talked about the best way for me to prep for this conference. I spent the last 9 days in La Romana practicing.
My home country, Dominican Republic.
I was actually playing golf, but that. So, you know, I think we're really at an interesting point in corporate history. I think that corporate America has finally gotten to the point now where most of the Fortune 500 companies recognize that they have to do something about this issue. And this is an issue that has been around for 50 years. It's the only business problem that we haven't solved. If there's an issue around revenue or margin or expenses, we fix those things very quickly. This area around diversity and representation in particular is the one area where we haven't made much progress. I spent the last 30 years, the last 15 as a CHRO, so my job really was to think about diversity in its totality. When I took this role a year ago, my focus became trying to get more blacks on boards. And when you look at the research, what it says is, though awareness has increased, representation, especially directly correlated to the color of your skin, hasn't. And so though the boards are getting more diverse, there's less blacks on boards, there's less Hispanics, less Asians on boards, but women have, in fact, made a little bit of progress. We have a number of programs that we have from a developmental perspective, from mid-level managers to try to get people ready for boards, all the way up into our 2 senior programs, one of which we partner with DeLoitte. We do something called the C-Suite Academy and the CEO Academy. That's to get people in their organizations at a level when people are looking for board members that we have supply. We've got a very senior level program that's called the Corporate Board Initiative that now we've run about 400 people through. And the Corporate Board Initiative is a number of experiences or programs to increase the supply of black-ready directors. That could be getting more people on nonprofit boards, working with other organizations like NACD, things like that. What we're going to pilot this year for the first time after 30 years is we've worked very hard on the supply. We're now in December going to work with the demand. So we're going to have a program in Atlanta called the African American Directors Forum, where we're going to bring 50 CEOs and their nom and gov chairs to one place. So that's going to be the demand, and then we're going to bring the supply to them. And we've never done that before. And what we hypothesize is that if we have the people that are making the decision in the room, and we have the talent in the room, we can get placements right there versus folks saying we can't find the talent.
I love that. So we'll, next time we're together, so when you invite us back next time, we're going to hopefully be able to see the progress.
We'll put a number up.
Yeah,
That's great.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah.
Linda, anything you'd like to add?
So I'll just share that for us, we're still working on the supply side in terms of the development of Asian and Pacific Islanders for different leadership opportunities. And I think that from an Asian and Pacific Islander community perspective, part of the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing is that despite some of the I'll say high-profile CEOs that we have, I mean, literally, I mean, anybody in our community can point to just maybe 2 or 3 people. And I think that that's part of the challenge that we're facing. So we're working towards increasing that supply of senior leaders. But I do want to say that from a LEAP perspective, we're partnering with all of the other ABD organizations to ensure that when there are opportunities available where boards are looking for diverse directors, we are all as best as we can, identifying diverse directors that are either current sitting board members or, more importantly, new board members or potential new board members who have the talent but have not yet been tapped for a board. And so that's one of the other things that we're working with the other ABD organizations. The other thing that I want to mention is that I'm from California. And as I like to say, as California goes, so goes the rest of the nation. And so we were the first in California to pass SB 826, which legislated women, gender diversity on boards of companies doing business in California. And in addition to that, you could clap, it's pretty cool. So in addition to that, as part of that, what I am doing is also working from an industry-specific perspective in terms of the insurance industry. A lot of work to be done, but I do know that from an insurance industry perspective, we're also trying to, as you'll hear, at least, again, like what we're doing with Missing Pieces, shining the light on diversity on insurance company boards. And what we're seeing is that there's a lot of work to be done, but legislation is winding through the California legislature to actually codify research that will be focused on collecting diversity numbers of insurance company boards to ensure that at least we know what the baseline is. And so we've been part of that in terms of advocating for that. And so it's a mix of both development and also advocacy from a legislative perspective that we're doing. So.
Yeah, and one little teaser for the audience. So one thing we're going to be doing with our data this year in the Missing Pieces report, which will hopefully be coming out shortly, is we will be providing an industry cut for the first time, which we have not done, and I think that will identify some interesting trends. Mm-hmm. Sid.
Sure. Thank you. Well, first of all, we're really excited to have this session because this is such an important topic, and thank you, Dale, Lorraine, Linda, Skip, and Deb for this session, because what you're going to see is that there's a common denominator of what is happening with the Latino, African American, Asia Pacific, and women. We're just not represented enough. And while we are happy that there are many companies that are now 40% diverse, we know that there is a significant number of companies that aren't even 10% diverse.
Right.
And so this is a topic that needs to be discussed and elevated. And one of the things that we've been doing within the Alliance for Diversity, and certainly on the issues of Hispanic inclusion on the part of ASED, is talking about this topic in locations and conferences where diversity and inclusion do not get discussed, but where you get a high presence of CEOs. And because what we don't want CEOs to do is to put their diversity hat on when you're at a diversity conference and then take your diversity hat off when you're at an industry conference. Yep. And so we want to make sure that we're present at those conferences. And so we're going to continue to do that. I was really happy that we were able to release the Missing Pieces report just 1 week before the World Economic Forum, where DeLoitte and ASED were able to present that at the Equality Lounge in Davos, where you know that there are hundreds of CEOs that are there, and making sure that the media is there, CNBC, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg Business News, Reuters, because we need to be sure that the message is not only being shared among those that, because we know that we have the choir here, we all understand that, but I want to be sure that it's being highlighted when companies are reporting their quarterly conference calls, when it's highlighted in their annual reports, when it's highlighted when there is news on a company in terms of what's happening with the financial results and how that correlates with diversity and inclusion. And so those are among the things that we want to continue to do, and I'm just so proud that that this is a great initiative and partnership that we're doing with the Alliance for Board Diversity. I'll give you just a quick statistic on something that we're giving a lot of focus on, because you'll see that we have a booth on that we're doing a Latina survey. And one of the reasons why we're giving a lot of attention on this is because when you talk about First, when you look at the whole Latino buying power, in fact, when I was sharing with someone who was the CEO of a global company, I said, you know, if I can name a country that is the 7th largest economy in the world, that is dollar denominated, that has a AAA rated bond rating, and that is growing faster than most developed countries, would you want to invest in that country? Sure. Yeah, of course we would. I said, well, that's the U.S. Hispanic community. We are the 7th largest economy in the world. We will be our own G7 country if that's the case. And the CEOs light up and say, I didn't know that. And so it's actually even making the case of why diversity and inclusion may even be a better business valuation strategy than your globalization strategy, because of the fact that we are not only a strong economy, a growing economy, but we're also a US-based economy.
Great. Lorraine.
First of all, thank you, Sid, and for being here today and making this a high priority, the first panel here. I joined Catalyst 8 months ago, but for those of you who are not familiar with Catalyst, we've been around since 1962 with the mission of advancing women in the workplace. And it's exciting to see so much progress really around the board because it's really very different from when we started. But one of the key issues that still exists is that boards are sort of an inside game. Many nominating governance committees and CEOs look to their internal network to decide who they're going to be bringing onto the board. So Catalyst launched a program in 2013 called the Women on Board program, where we pair board-ready women in companies with CEOs of corporations so that they sponsor them to get on their first board. So this really addresses this insider game and really talks about the importance of sponsorship, not only for boards, but for moving people up within corporations. And since we've started, we've had 176 placements, and 65% of our participants get on boards, and it's mostly public boards.
That is fabulous.
Thank you. So recently, we just announced that Altria, who's one of our board members, has given us $1 million grant to expand our Women on Board practice, and specifically around women of color. Because while the numbers are really improving, the numbers around women of color on boards are still not where they need to be. It's women overall are 22% in the Fortune 500, but women of color is 4.6%. So we still have a long way to go. So I'm going to say to all of you, if you have board-ready women within your organization that you want to help them get their first-time board, come speak to us. Misha's here, she runs our board practice. If you have CEOs who want to be sponsors, please come talk to us. We want to make this happen, and we're also working very closely with everyone in the Alliance to make sure we have a great pool of board-ready women who we can give them their first placement.
Great. Well, again, terrific initiatives. And Dale, Diversified Search, you have a very special role that you all are playing. So can you share with the group who may not be as familiar what you're doing broadly around search and then specifically around boards?
Sure. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and it's exciting to be here with my colleague, Jason Leone, who is an alumnus of HACR and is very, very active in our board practice and helping us identify leaders in search. Our firm's been around for 45 years. It was started many years ago by a woman to help women find jobs in corporate America, and is now morphed to be one of the largest top 10 search firms in the country today. But the beauty of our work is that our consultants who recruit leaders are also diverse. We believe that it's important to have men and women of color doing the recruiting who understand where to go to find talent and to leverage their networks to bring people into the C-suite. And so the beginning of finding great board members is you got to be sure that many board members, potential candidates, are in the C-suites of major corporations and organizations in America. And so we recruit leaders to become very engaged in the C-suite, either in hospitals, in technology companies, consumer, industrial, life science businesses, because oftentimes boards go first to the C-suite to look for leadership. in terms of their organizations. And if there are not enough people in the C-suite, then all of a sudden people come back and say, well, we didn't find any. And that's never a good answer. And so in addition to recruiting directors, we also are looking for how do we make sure that there are more people represented in the C-suite and organizations to give leadership, so that in turn there's opportunity and a pipeline and a robust talent pool for boards. In addition to having diverse consultants in our business and also being a member of ABD, the Alliance for Board Diversity, we're very intentional when we talk to our clients about how do we bring a diverse slate to the table, which we do in every case when we're talking about recruiting board members. So that's an important factor here. But I also want to echo what Sid just said, and that is helping our clients understand particularly the value of the growing Hispanic economy that is global. And so most top Fortune 500 companies have half of their revenue streams coming from outside the US. And those revenue streams oftentimes come from Latin America, Europe, Asia, Africa. And so we have to help our clients become more educated as we think about being global and finding leaders, particularly in the Hispanic context. Lastly, the thing that we have to do is we have to educate our clients who oftentimes will say to us, I want a Latino leader who's a sitting CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And then we have to remind them, well, there are only 3 of those, and they're already boarded up. And so what we have to do is educate leaders to say there are leaders out there who may not be in the C-suite today, but they are a high potential C-suite holder, and you can get them today before they are promoted to that level so that you can have access to that talent in the boardroom. And so we have to do a little bit of pushback, a bit of educating to help our clients realize that every person they need to serve on their board is not just sitting in the C-suite or is not the sitting CEO or CFO. So Diversified Search is pleased to be a partner with ELC and LEAP and HACR and Catalyst, but we believe that we have to be very thoughtful in educating our clients when they come to us and say, I'm looking for this certain kind of leader. And we want to broaden their thinking to say, that person may be there, but can we help you think about others as well?
Skip, you were going to add something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, interesting, Dale. I don't know, maybe a couple months ago, I was on a panel, and the panel was over with, and then a CEO of a Fortune 50 company then had an opportunity to address the group. And during that conversation, he said, I've got a board seat open, and I'm looking for a CEO to fill that last slot. And so as opposed to raising a question in front of the audience, when he came back down, we had a conversation, and I said, well, if that's what you're looking for, you've excluded just about any underrepresented group. So maybe you should think about it a different way. Yeah. What are the skills and competencies that you're looking for that CEO has? If you're looking for P&L, if you're looking for global experience, if you're looking for marketing experience, when you do your skills inventory matrix, that's what you should look for versus the title, because the title does not ensure that you're going to get those skills. And you know, one of the best things about our jobs is when you're talking to a CEO and a light bulb comes on, and that's what happened.
Yeah, that's great.
If I could just add real quick, just because I think even building on what Skip mentioned is that this is also a conversation that we're having with CEOs of saying, you know, don't pigeonhole us into positions that are not CEO track positions. That we need to be sure that we have diversity in the CEO track roles, including giving them those international assignments so that when they come back to us, when they say, we want someone with international experience and we want someone with those skills, that we have that pipeline. So we need for for the CEOs to recognize that there needs to be not only diversity and inclusion, but there needs to be intentionality. Right. So that there is an intentionality to say, we are going to put diversity into these tracks. Because if you take, I gave you the statistics for Hispanics, but if you take the combination of Black, Hispanic, and Asian Pacific buying power, it's at around $4.1 trillion, and the GDP is around $4.8, $4.9 trillion. Only China and Japan are larger than that. So that makes us the third largest. And so when you're a CEO and you're looking at the growth on this, and when you factor in women, you know, the buying power is just humongous, and yet and yet when you portray it in that standpoint, it starts to raise eyebrows.
Yeah, and I just want to make a comment that the program that we have is aimed at getting people on their first board. And as part of the overall development of people who become CEO ready, being on an outside board is something that people should be, CEOs should be thinking about in terms of the range of capabilities. So it is part of the grooming process. So this is why it's so important that we identify a broader pool of potential candidates. We give them those exposure experience. We get them into the right networks so they can be part of that. And when someone knows someone, understands their skills, is part of the network, then they're more likely to put them on the board.
Well, and Linda, maybe I'll ask you to talk about this, because one of the issues that the report does highlight is this thing we call the recycle rate. And what we found, and it's continued now for a number of years, is that there's a smaller pool of minority and women who are being recycled across multiple boards. So maybe, Linda, you can talk a little bit about that and what the trends suggest.
Sure. So so I'll just say that overall, it's interesting because the recycle rate has been going down. The Fortune 100, the recycle rate for Fortune 100 companies is lower. So in other words, Fortune 100 companies are doing a better job at actually looking for and finding board members, diverse board members who are not sitting on multiple boards. Whereas the Fortune 500, their recycle rate is overall higher than the Fortune 100. What is interesting is that, and I'm sorry, I'm going to go ahead and pull out my little cheat sheet here because there's a couple things that I want to just share. On the Fortune 100, what we're seeing in terms of the Fortune 100 is that minority women have the highest recycle rates. And that is being led, and I thought that this would be of interest to you all, that's being led by Latinas. So in other words, Latinas have the highest recycle rates. And so what it means is then that they're sitting on 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 boards. And so there's an issue right there in terms of, I think boards need to do a better job of seeking out, and the pool is there. In terms of Fortune 500 recycle rates, what we're seeing again is that minority women, again, have the highest recycle rates on Fortune 500 boards. And on the Fortune 500, it's being driven, the higher numbers are being driven by both Black and Hispanic women. So in other words, again, boards need to do a better job than what they're doing right now.
Well, and then by definition, the lowest recycle rate are Caucasian men.
Are Caucasian men, yes, and then Caucasian women, and then actually Asian American, generally both men and women are okay, although Asian American women aren't as low as white men and white women and Asian men. So that kind of gets into some of the weeds there, but there's work to be done.
So, you know, I know, Linda, you referred earlier to the legislation in California. And this morning, I'm from Chicago. I was reading the Chicago Tribune online, and there's an editorial actually by the Illinois Hispanic Chamber of Commerce CEO, Jaime DePaulo. And right now being proposed in Illinois is legislation that is a bit unique. The California legislation had a gender mandate, and the Illinois legislation, if passed, would require each public board headquartered in Illinois to have at least one woman, one African American or Black, or one Hispanic or Latino member on its board, which is, you know, quite different and more aggressive. We also know that there are investor groups that are putting pressure on boards of directors in specifically in times voting against the NomGov chair or the committee if they're not advancing diversity. And some of those investors include State Street and BlackRock and Vanguard, the New York City Comptroller. So Dale, I'm gonna ask you this question because are you seeing changes in the way companies are coming to you and pursuing candidates in the last few years, and do you think these outside forces are driving change?
So the answer around outside forces driving change, I believe, is yes. I think more and more corporations are realizing that they are stewards of the public trust, and beyond just creating businesses and revenue, that there's a public trust at hand that they must honor with respect to their customers, employees, and shareholders. And so I think there are a number of corporations that are sort of taking action in an affirmative sense to do the right thing. For example, I serve on the board of Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance, where we have three African Americans on the board, 2 Latino Americans on the board, 1 Asian American, 3 women, and then 1 individual who self-identifies as LGBT. And that's half of the board today, which is commendable because they've done this out of what's the right thing to do as a business as opposed to being propelled by regulatory efforts. Larry Fink speaks to this from BlackRock about what's the right thing for companies to do. But I also believe that some companies won't do the right thing unless there is added incentive and pressure to do so. And so I think the regulatory efforts in California and perhaps soon to be in Illinois speak to an opportunity that will be very real. But I personally don't see that catching fire across the country. That's just sort of my point of view. I think most states will not adopt those policies, but that's debatable. What I do believe, though, we need to get more in pension funds and like CalPERS and others to push boards for term limits, because what happens is most boards in today's world don't have term limits. So you can join a board at 45 years of age or 50 years of age, and the retirement age is 70 or 75. So you have some board members who have a 30-year window or 25-year window on a board that keeps a blockage of new people joining those boards. So we need to see more around term limits so that there are more opportunities opening up to be able to change the dynamics of the board, as opposed to people coming on a board and serving for more than 10, 15 years. Yep. That becomes a challenge and a blockage.
I'd like to add to that. Probably the biggest inhibitor now, since the awareness is so high to have more diversity on boards, is the rate of change. So it's the number of people changing off of boards is really inhibiting things. So a couple of things people can do: they can put term limits. They could also add 1 seat to a board. Right. That's an innovative way to approach things. Because if you look at, let's say, 50% of the board seats that are open have someone of color or a woman on the board, but you only have 5% of the seats opening up every year, then the numbers are going to crawl up at a very slow rate. And I think that's what we're coming up with, why we're making the number potentially in 2026 rather than having made it today. So I think there's some opportunity really there to change the norms around boards and make a difference. In fact, I was speaking to someone who said we should ask boards of directors to add 1 woman or person of color to the board every year for the next 3 years. And you can do it through having some hard, difficult conversations with people, even if you don't have term limits, or by adding a seat. And that would accelerate things very quickly.
Yeah, interestingly, just in this last census, I mean, we actually did see that in the Fortune 500. There were roughly 250 plus seats added from 2016, which had not been happening. Actually, what board seats in total had sort of stayed flat, in some cases even gone down. I think during the financial crisis, we actually saw boards get relatively smaller, and the average size is somewhere between 8 to 10. So I think there are some that are flexing up a bit, but I agree. I think the pace and people rolling off is going to be critical. Yes, Sid.
I was going to build on that because I know that we've been watching companies actually reduce their number of the total board count. Almost some that are down to 8, and there are some companies who have a huge market cap, but their board of directors is 8, no term limits, and because of the fact that you have such small groups, it becomes very clubbish. And so that yields this word of mouth system of looking for another board director, and it's not about always who's the best qualified, who's the best person for that seat is, who do you know, and are you willing to put your credibility to put this person so they go with their circle, and often if it's not diverse, they're going to go with non-diverse candidates for those board seats. So it's so important that we continue to keep this right in front as a major important initiative, and that's why I think what's happened in California, what is happening right now in Illinois, it's more, I mean, I'm sure that New York is probably looking at this as well to see if this is something that's needed, because if corporations are not prepared to to change this word-of-mouth system of selecting your board directors, eventually the legislatures are going to start saying we need to act, because you think about who actually contributes to the 401ks in this country, to the public pensions in this country, and who are the donors? They're mostly people of color and women. And so, which means that we're the ones that are fueling a lot of the investments, and yet the shares are not being used, I think, adequately enough to push for diversity. So I do commend, what some of the, whether it's like New York City Controller has been doing to push that, and others to really say we need to do that, as well as what Larry Fink has done at BlackRock.
But Sid, I think it's way past the time of awareness from my perspective.
Now it's action.
And so I appreciate the commentary, but I would just ask a question, just by show of hands. Who in this room is responsible for diversity, or in HR in their respective organizations? All right, so roughly half. And so I'll give you a perspective from a public board member, from a C-suite executive, and now running a very similar organization. When you're sitting in the boardroom, every committee comes through, audit committee comes through, finance committee comes through, the marketing folks come in, HR comes in. And as a board member, you're listening to all these things, and what you have to do as practitioners is figure out how can you make your voice heard. And one of the benefits, I think, of the ABD is that we don't go to the market just individually. We go to market as a collective group. And so, again, if I go back to my corporate experience, if you come into the board or with your executives and it's just you talking about this challenge, you're just one of every other business challenge that they have. Back to my initial comments, is this has been a problem for 50 years that hasn't moved. So how do you take the information that you just described? You make an alliance with your head of government affairs. You make an alliance with your head of investor relations. Because your government affairs person, when they walk in and talk to the board, and they talk to the C-suite executives and they say, trust me, legislation's coming, people get concerned because nobody wants the government to tell them how to do their business.
Right.
If investor relations says, listen, just got a call from BlackRock, Larry Fink said we're gonna vote no on all our shares, that gets people's attention. So I would only just advise, form that coalition, HR, D&I, government affairs, investor relations, know what your market is, know what your industry is, and approach this problem as a coalition versus just trying to do it by yourself.
I'd like to add a comment about that. The Bloomberg has the Gender Equity Index, and it measures a lot of things around diversity and inclusion, including boards. And they now have 230 companies that agree to disclose all this information. It's available on the Bloomberg terminal. The people in that index are outperforming almost double what the S&P 500. They're at about a 24% return versus 14% return. And the reason why these companies are doing this is because the investors are asking. The reason why Bloomberg is involved in this is because of what the investors are asking for. So I do agree that connecting up with government affairs and investor relations is critical, because that's where the stakeholders really are voicing their power.
But I think that, the numbers, we're all talking about these numbers, right? And I think, the kind of like what you said, the awareness of the numbers, I think, is to a degree there. But I think, Sid, what you said about word of mouth is also important, because of the new seats that were added, half of them, more than half, went to white men. And no disrespect to white men, but I mean, it's just still interesting that we're talking about adding seats helps diversify boards, which helped a little bit, as you saw in the progress that we had. But I'm going to just throw this out there for all of us on the panel, and maybe for those of you who might want to ask this question. But I think there is one thing that does happen. White men have absolutely no problem recommending other white men to board seats. But for people of color, I am serious. I feel like this is an issue in the Asian American community. We are so self-conscious about, oh my God, if I recommend somebody who looks like me, I'm going to get accused of favoring someone that looks like me. And so I think we become a little gun-shy about recommending other people of color. We may recommend somebody else, possibly from another minority group, but we won't recommend from our own. And I think sometimes that becomes one of the challenges that's is there in the work in these boardrooms, and the word of mouth, I think, becomes like, well, I know this other person, but it may not necessarily be always a diversity.
So we've got some very actionable things, which is great. So Skip, Linda, Sid, Lorraine, Dale, thank you. You guys were terrific, and you gave them some very actionable takeaways.
Thank you. Thank you.